So often, I think, we have to stand back and ask what is going on. And there's so much stuff we really don't know about. We just don't know what is happening. And we get the icing on the cake, and we're supposed to draw some sort of conclusions from that. Or not, actually. We are just the public. We are observing. The real business is being dealt with by, quote, the professionals. But they're not so professional. That's the problem. So let's take the Richard Sharp situation. And all of this is about an £800,000 loan, which Richard Sharp is supposed to have brokered. There's this fellow called Blythe who's a sort of, what was he? He runs private schools in Canada. The one thing we don't know is whether that money actually arrived in Boris's pocket. We don't know whether it actually was paid. Isn't that an extraordinary omission? And then the whole story, Bay is growling at something. The whole story has been catapulted further into the news by a cartoon drawn by Martin Rowson. Now, Martin Rowson's cartoon, let's put it up here so that we can actually see it. Martin Rowson's cartoon is fairly awful. The editor of The Guardian is meeting today or tomorrow with Jewish authorities to discuss the way forward, but she has form. Steve Bell produced a cartoon a while ago, and this was actually rejected by her for anti-Semitic tropes. Now, if you compare this cartoon with the one that was being printed, it's quite extraordinarily bland. This cartoon is against Mr. Netanyahu. The cartoonist, Steve Bell, felt that he had been unfairly traduced and censored by The Guardian. He said that he cannot for the life of me begin to understand the criticism of the cartoon that begins by dragging in wood-burning stoves, ovens, Holocaust, and that was the last thing on my mind as I drew it. I had no intention of conflating these issues with the mass murder of European Jews and Gaza. The cartoon is sensitive, it's not tasteless, it's not disrespectful, and certainly contains no anti-Semitic tropes. I would be entirely in agreement with Steve Bell about this cartoon, but I'm not in agreement about the Rowson cartoon, which I think is simply abhorrent. As I say, Catherine Avena wants to diffuse the situation. Well, there is only one way to diffuse that situation, and that's for her to resign. Or Martin Rowson's resignation for doing it. Now, you could say, well, that's not what he intended, but then nor was the racist insult intended by David Coburn against Humza Yousaf. This was a story with which I was personally connected, and I drew cartoons during that time. I drew cartoons, quite brutal cartoons, I think, of David Coburn sitting on the loo saying, "I'm finished." He never really was finished, unfortunately. He clung on, and he didn't go. There was no resignation, there was no apology for an appalling comparison that Coburn made between Humza Yousaf, now First Minister, and Abu Hamza, still in prison for terrorist offences in America. It was just a joke, as Nigel Farage pointed out. But the casual racism is how we measure racism. If you can make a racist comment so casually that it can be dismissed as just a joke, then it's very serious. And it's the pig, I think, which is the big sticking point in this picture. The pig and possibly the squid, because I can't see any reason why the squid is there except to recall the tentacles of anti-Semitic tropes that we saw all the way through the Nazi propaganda cartoons and before, going way back into the 19th century. So this anti-Semitic stereotype was already there, with its tentacles, with its puppetry and so on. Now, when we come to the puppetry, have a look at this picture. This picture is by a man called Garrison, And this caused a huge storm in America in 2017, I think. So much so that it led to resignations. Now, the problem really is the Rothschild hand, this green hand puppeteering Soros and so on. In a sense, it doesn't look that anti-Semitic, does it? So if this is condemned as anti-Semitic, compare this image with the one that was printed in The Guardian. The one that was printed in The Guardian practically presents Richard Sharp as a Fagin character, holding his money. It's an extraordinarily insulting personal caricature, and it's deeply offensive. And the whole thing is set in an environment covered in excrement. And the pig has got blood coming out of its mouth. Again, shades of anti-Semitic tropes about blood cults and so on. If this is not intentionally anti-Semitic, then Martin Rowson has such a lack of sensibility and lack of knowledge about the traditions of cartooning that he should stop immediately before he does any further damage. I think this can only end in the resignation of either the cartoonist or the editor.